This is lecture 5, and our subject is writing dog stories. So what you're reading in this unit is 3 examples of ways to think about and to practice the writing of dogs' stories, dogs and other animals, as you'll see in a couple of these cases. So what I want you to think about for this unit is really how these different authors are bringing a variety of ways of putting to paper the experience of what dogs are and how we as humans interact with dogs. We've been talking about that set of relationships and sort of the idea of the essence of what a dog is, or a dog's animalhood or personhood. And what these 3 authors are really trying to do is to figure out how can we adequately represent that in our writing. So what you're reading are 3 different examples of how 3 different authors have gone about that, and they're quite distinct from one another. But I think sort of as a group, they're food for thought for how we might do that ourselves. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these approaches. And the other thing I want you to think about as we go through these is that more than anything, these examples are meant as inspiration for you as you work on your final project for this course, which is going to be to write a dog biography. There's a handout already available. I'll talk a little bit more at the end of this lecture about exactly what that project will be. But a lot of what I'm hoping you'll get from these 3 readings is some ideas and some different approaches that you might think about for yourself. You don't have to do it exactly like any of these, but hopefully they will inspire you to think about how you're going to do your own. So the first of these 3 pieces is the Van Doren and Rose, and this is sort of the closest to an anthropological approach to writing dog stories or animal stories, because they're really thinking about the practice of ethnography, right, which we've already talked about, which is the way that culture anthropologists both collect information from a social setting and then write about it in a very sort of detailed way through often hearing and telling people's stories. So it's a very sort of narrative approach to representing culture in a particular time and space. And it rests on a real appreciation for the significance of everyday activities and everyday experiences, okay? So what Van Doren and Rose are trying to do in this particular article is talk about how we might extend that ethnographic practice, which historically anthropologists have primarily used to reflect on and write about human beings' experiences, how we might extend that to representing the lives of non-humans. And, we've already read a lot of examples in this course about how much all of us, many of us, interact in a daily way with other sort of non-humans, whether it's our dog or the squirrels that are running across the path as we walk across campus. So Van Doren and Rose are thinking about why we should think about how to do an ethnographic representation of other kinds of animals and how we might. So I want to talk about a few of the key sort of points and key theoretical tools that they use in here. The way they describe that sort of ethnography is what they call lively ethnography. And what they mean here is really allowing for the non-human characters, if you will, in a social world to also be animated, right? To be represented as whole beings in the stories that we tell in our writing as anthropologists. And they suggest that sort of all beings, humans and non-humans, have a sort of way of life that they talk about as ethos, right? So again, culture anthropologists have typically been focused on culture as our sort of term for the way of life of humans in a particular time and place. So they're saying, well, we might not call it culture per se, but there is a sort of life way of the non-humans around us, and capturing what that life way is like, again, might very much enrich what we do as anthropologists. They also suggest that, one of the key things that anthropologists do is to bear witness to what goes on around us in a particular social world, and to capture that through hearing and reproducing stories, through storytelling, right? And that is storytelling premised on careful attention to details, right? Observation, interactions, etc. So they're suggesting that there's something that is sort of profound about that act of storytelling. And the more we are able to bring other sort of beings into our storytelling, the richer that product will be. So here's one of the quotes from the article that I think captures that idea. They say, storytelling is one of the great arts of witness. And in these difficult times, telling lively stories is a deeply committed project, one of engaging with the multitudes of others in their noisy, fleshy living and dying. It is the aim of lively ethnographies to seize our relational imagination. It is an engagement with the joys, passions, desires, and commitments of earth others, as they call them. So again, that same sort of generosity and openness that we extend to other humans in the attempt to talk about how people live their lives in ethnographic writing, they suggest we can and should extend to the non-human beings we engage with. So the next piece that you read is the other two pieces are not anthropology, but I think they are in the spirit of the kind of things that we want to do for this project. So that's why I thought to have you read them. So one is the Dickey reading, and this is an excerpt from a book that she wrote that is essentially the history of the pit bull in American culture, or sort of starting in Europe and some of the antecedents to the modern pit bull, but primarily as they're understood in U.S. society. And it's really sort of both tracing the history of this dog breed, right, from the sort of origins of, people creating the breed through sort of trial and error over time, and also the shifts over time in public attitudes about pit bulls. As I'm sure you know, pit bulls have gone through periods, and I suggest we're probably still in that period, of being considered sort of inherently aggressive or vicious or danger to people or whatever. That's one set of assumptions that are often projected onto the pit bull for a variety of reasons that Dickey goes into. For much of the sort of early part of the 20th century, they were considered the ideal household pet and an icon, a symbol for advertising, etc. So part of what she's getting at here is there's nothing inherent about this breed or any other breed. But like many other things, we tend to project all kinds of social attitudes, both about dogs and about people, onto our characterization of different breeds. So the way this might work as an example, sort of, again, thinking about your own dog biographies, Dickey's not sort of telling the biography of just one dog, but it's more like the biography of the breed, which I think is another approach that you could draw from, right? She does in the book tell the stories of a lot of examples of both people and individual dogs, as you'll see when you read it. So I think it's another, again, another example that you can draw from for inspiration as you think about your own dog biographies. The third piece that you read is the one that's probably the most sort of creative, and is, I think, you could say sort of a hybrid between some nonfiction and fiction elements. It's probably the farthest from a sort of academic piece among the three that you read. But I wanted to include it because I think it's also a sort of profoundly engaged and creative approach to thinking about writing dogs' stories. So this is the book by Miles that she calls a dog memoir, and it's really her attempt to represent the life of her dog, who was in fact a pit bull named Rosie, and she does so both by reflecting on the life and death of Rosie from her own human perspective, but also in passages in the book where she takes on Rosie's voice and tries to sort of tell the story through Rosie's eyes. So she sort of speaks as a dog in parts of this text. And the excerpt I gave you includes some that are sort of from Miles's perspective, and another part that's written sort of from Rosie's perspective, if you will. And it's really unusual and interesting. And again, so I think it could absolutely just, again, you don't have to write something like this, but it's just another example of a way to try to sort of creatively and effectively use all the kinds of tools at our disposal as writers to try to do justice to the complexity that is a dog's life and the complexity that is the relationship between dogs and humans, right? Something we've been trying to sort of address and unpack this entire term so far. So Miles, I think, as well as anyone, does a really excellent job of, um, bringing us all that sort of emotional and personal material that's embedded in that relationship. And this is a picture of her with Rosie, the pit bull, who she writes about and represents. So again, I hope you enjoy reading these. I find them, but all three, to be sort of really fascinating approaches to thinking about this issue of writing dog stories. And as I said, I want you to read them anyways because I think they're interesting. I think they'll enrich our understanding of dogs, but also more precisely as a source of thinking for the final project, which is a dog biography. This on the slide here is an excerpt from the handout for the final project, which is available on G2L. So, when you have a minute, make sure you read the handout carefully. But I just wanted to sort of touch on it here to directly connect what you're being asked to do in this assignment to those readings that we've just been discussing. So, what you will be doing is writing what I'm calling a quote-unquote dog biography, which can be a biography of a dog you know or a dog you don't know. I characterize it as a dog you know or a quote-unquote famous dog. I'm really open to what you do, but those are sort of a couple of ways to think about it. And I do want you to explicitly sort of draw inspiration from the readings we just were discussing, the week 6 readings. Again, you don't have to do it exactly like those week 6 readings, but I hope that they will encourage you to think broadly and creatively about what you do for this paper. So I'm asking you to reflect on what you've learned about dogs and about the relationships between dogs and people. And I'm asking you to think about different writing styles, right, to enrich our presentation of information about dogs. And I'm asking you to apply both of those things to creatively constructing a dog biography, okay? You can choose any dog. I mean, I like the idea of it being a biography so that there being at least sort of a central character or a central dog that you represent, even if you want to extend then to talk about a broader category of dogs through the lens of that dog that you focus on. It could be your own dog. It could be your family's dog. It could be a dog you had when you were a kid. It could be your neighbor's dog, right? It could also be famous dogs. And what I mean by famous dogs is just any dog that you've sort of learned about through sort of public representation. A dog that was profiled in the media, a dog, an actor dog, right? Or a dog in TV series or in films or on social media, right? So feel free to also choose a dog like that you will never personally meet, but that you can sort of learn about and get a sense of by, watching or following those media sources, okay? Again, I want this to be a creative project, and I want to give you a lot of leeway in terms of how you do it, with the hopes that you'll come up with some fantastic, creative, interesting stuff. You can, therefore, draw on those sources that you're reading for class, the class readings, if you want to. You don't have to. I want you to be inspired by them. Whether you, specifically talk about them in the paper, that part's up to you. You can also look at some other sources, right? I'm suggesting here, you may want to choose a dog that is, being profiled in the news, or, a dog that has a well-trafficked account on social media somewhere, whatever it is, right? So you can draw information from that, right? You can reference those articles or that TikTok account or whatever it might be, right? So it's really up to you how you craft and how you present your dog biography. But I do want you to have a few key components, right, which I list here and which are on the handout. I want you to evoke the dog's life in a thoughtful and detailed way. I want you to reflect on course themes and have that represented, present in the paper that you turn in. I want you to demonstrate your creativity, right? So I want to see that you thought about how to do this in the best way and that you took some risks and did something interesting. And finally, I want this to also be one where you do take pains to have the writing be as strong as it can be. So I want you to try to work on a carefully edited, sort of polished piece of writing. It doesn't mean it has to be a stodgy academic paper. It can be quite creative, but make sure that the language itself, the writing itself, is well thought out and well crafted. Okay. So it's a minimum of 5 pages, this paper. It can be longer, absolutely. I think it would be hard to do what I'm asking you to do in less than 5 pages. So I do think it's important that that's probably a minimum. but if it ends up being longer than that, that's absolutely no problem. And that would be great if you find that there's something inspiring that you want to represent there. Now, the paper's due at the end of the term, right? This is an 8-week term, so it's due at the end of the 8 weeks. So look on the syllabus for the due date there. But I'll say that there's a first step, which is a chance to really get the wheels turning and think about this, and for me to give you a little bit of feedback, which is discussion 5. So in discussion 5, you are going to describe your plan for this project. All right, so that's a chance to sort of float an idea and see how you think it'll work. So you're going to talk about sort of what you plan to do and why, given all the things we've talked about. And that's due later this coming week, so by the 26th, okay? So get thinking about it. You don't have to commit quite yet, or you don't need to have it completely worked out, but I do want you to have an initial idea of how to do it by the end of this coming week, and then that still leaves you quite a bit of time to work on it and really polish it up. I'm really looking forward to these projects. I think they're going to be really interesting. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.